All right, let's get more on all of this with Sadanand Dhum. He's with the American Enterprise Institute. He's a resident fellow focusing on South Asia. That's the region we're talking about. And I want to start with Nepal because President Xi Jinping is there right now. Kathmandu has really laid out the red carpet for him. Why is this visit so important to Nepal?
Well, a couple of things. First, this is the first Chinese president to visit Nepal since 1996, when Jiang Zemin had visited. So there's been a long time, nearly a quarter century. Secondly, you find that Nepal, especially under the current government, is really trying to amp up its development and is turning to China for investment, particularly in infrastructure.
Compared to elsewhere in the region, China invests relatively little in Nepal. Ahead of this visit, Nepal put out 10 or 11 items that it wanted investment in: infrastructure, I believe transportation, hydroelectricity, but there seems to be diverging views over how that money should be coming. China wanting it in forms of loans, Nepal wanting it as grants. Why the difference and which side will?
So two quick points. I mean, first, of course, it's true that China invests much less in Nepal than, say, in other places in the region, including Pakistan or Sri Lanka. But you have to understand that Nepal is a much smaller country, so those dollars go farther. Now, the debate about how that money comes through, I have no idea how they're going to resolve it, but it really comes down to the question that many countries face about whether taking on these developmental projects also leads to a debt burden or not. And I think each government has to sort of figure it out for themselves and do a cost-benefit analysis.
Xi Jinping arrived in Nepal after wrapping up a visit to India, not an obvious choice, as China has a long history of backing Pakistan. India, of course, a strong U.S. ally in the region. This was an informal summit. Do you think it achieved its aims?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I think the aims of these, this is the second one, right? Last year, Prime Minister Modi had visited India and had gone to Wuhan, where again he spent a couple of days with President Xi Jinping. I think what both countries are trying to do, they have many, many disputes, but I think what both countries are trying to do is bring in these leadership level contacts, these so-called informal summits. China does not, to the best of my knowledge, do this with any other country, to sort of ensure that they don't end up creating disputes where there are differences.
One of those disputes, of course, Jammu and Kashmir, China, Nepal, and China, India, and of course Pakistan parties in that dispute. How did that play into this visit of Xi Jinping to India?
So it wasn't good for the optics at all, because until a couple of days before the visit, it hadn't even been announced. And just 2 days before the visit, Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, as you know, visited Beijing and met with President Xi Jinping. Now, I think the issue here between India and China is less their own contesting claims to parts of Kashmir, but it's more that India feels that China has backed Pakistan unequivocally in the UN and elsewhere, and that's been a friction point. And I'm sure that that's something that the two sides are trying to work out.
One Indian official referred to India and China, the world's two most populous countries, as frenemies. Do you think he's right?
I think that's pretty accurate. I think that, you have many areas of, for example, global trade, climate change, expansion of international institutions where India and China have found themselves on the same side. But they do have a border dispute. There is this Pakistan-Kashmir issue. There are other tensions that they compete in some areas and they are cooperative in other areas. So I think that's actually a fair description.
For our international viewers, frenemies, of course, that verbal merger of friends and enemies.
Of course.
Sadanand Dhum, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.